Okay, we're here for episode number. We're already up to 9, Nancy. 9 plus a pilot.
It's hard to believe.
Man, it's hard to believe.
And the pandemic continues.
Pandemic continues. I'm Richard Adams with my fancy backdrop today. Like the dog.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great dog.
Yeah. Who's Cheryl? What's her name? Who did that?
Cheryl Lyon, Silver Lake Mills had designed our dancing dog.
I know where you know where Silver Lake Mills is? It's at Silver Lake in Dayton. That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just go and look for the lake that looks silver, and there you got it. So last week we did Lewis and Clark, and I actually learned a whole lot about that. I've been saying frontier all week, explaining why it's a frontier. And this week, obviously, there's something to do with here's your
ho ho ho.
Yeah, man. I think this is the original 19. You know, it's born.
That's an antique, Richard.
That's an antique. I've got some antique stuff right there. So this is like from way back in the late 50s, man. I was born on December 23rd. So
hey, you're almost a Christmas baby. Did that mess up your birthdays?
Oh, I've written a whole book on it. Yeah, it's coming out anyway. Yeah. So yeah, because my brother and sister, I was the middle child, you know, and my brother and sister said, we're gonna get you something big for your birthday and Christmas combination. And when I was 11, my mother stopped that. God rest her soul. Anyway.
So tell us about your book coming out.
Oh yeah, well the book is going to be called 11 Brown Lane, and it's I write all these things on Facebook, and the reason I put them on Facebook is because that way I couldn't lose them. Because if you saw the rest of my house, you'd go like, you're a clutter bug too. I know you keep papers, right?
Right.
Keep
papers
things.
And books.
Yeah, I'm a historian. I'm a grandson of an antique dealer, and my grandmother was an antique dealer. My grandfather was a junk collector. So I can always see the value in something for the future's sake. And I've had it happen way too many times.
Yeah, my nephew told me I was a hoarder.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, so kind of a / Episcopalian-ish hoarder.
Yes, I think it's a genetic disease.
Yeah, Lutheran hoarders are, even probably worse. Anyway, the Episcopalians probably have more liquor. But yeah, I know you don't drink, I don't drink, so we got to come up with some reason.
Got to figure it
out. So anyway, so the book's coming out in the fall. It's in the last editing stage right now. My editor, God, that seems weird to say that. Editor said that she decided to put it in sequential order because it's so random. There are all these random stories, but I'm pretty random anyway. So she's putting it in there so she can take out some repetitiveness in the introduction. It's like, I was born in blah blah. I do this whatever this history thing. I can't help it.
So you mean it's going to be ready for Christmas presents?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Along with your cattle book at a discount price.
That's right.
Yeah. So history of cattle in Virginia. So anyway, so 11 Brown Lane. That's where I lived when I was a little kid, and that's why I called it that. And I have a picture of my sister pointing down at me, my baby sister pointing. She's a dean now, so pointing down at me and my brother in our football helmets because we were coaches' kids. So anyway, so so today we're doing Christmas. Well,
we figured we'd do Christmas in July. It's about 6 months till Christmas. People are ready to celebrate something. They've been holed up for a while. So let's talk about Christmas and the history of Christmas, which is probably not anything of what you expect.
The history of Christmas in the central Shenandoah Valley.
History of Christmas in general, and then we'll get real specific in the central Shenandoah Valley.
Okay, you ready? On your mark, get set, go.
Okay, Christmas. Okay, so we think, Jesus was born on December 25th, right? Yeah, we have no idea when Jesus was born. Probably wasn't December 25th because if you recall, Joseph and Mary were going to Bethlehem because that was where they were from to be counted in a census. And nobody was going to probably send people off on a journey in the winter for a census. So it probably was in the fall or something like that. But how did it come to be December 25th? Well, you have to go way, way before Christianity, which is a little over 2,000, probably 2,024 years ago, because by most scholars' accounts, Jesus was probably born about what we would call now 4 BC, when BC is before Christ. Okay. So if we're 2020, then you got to back up 4 years. So 2,024 years ago, he was born sometime in that year, but almost definitely not at Christmas, at December 25th. So, but, Europe wasn't just newly settled. Europe had been settled for tens of thousands of years, and there were ancient religions, ancient celebrations really tied into the earth and the seasons that were already there. So what happened was, Christianity is born in the Middle East, where the Jewish people lived, and Jesus was a Jew, and so it kind of gave birth there and then spread through missionary work to the rest of the world. And when it spread into Europe, there was already a lot of what people today call pagan religions, but it's just pre-Christian religions that had been developing for since before recorded time. And as I said, they're associated with the seasons. So the most important times of the year for ancient peoples was when spring comes again, summer comes, you can plant your plants, and it's good times, but you have to stock up for the winter, and then the days get dark and the days get short, and it's very scary, and you wonder if we're ever going to have those good times and those long days of daylight again, and you get to
kind of like pandemia
where we come out of it. Well, they knew they came out of it because ancient peoples watched the skies and kept records in their head, or in some kind of written fashion, and so they knew that the four biggies for the year were the spring equinox. That's when the days you get exactly equal. Equinox comes from the word equal, so you have equal amounts of day and night, and then you go further into the season. So that occurs in March, around March 21st, something like that. Then you move on towards summer, and June 21st is a great day to celebrate because it's the longest day of the year. It's the most daylight that you have. And that whole summer is when you're growing your crops and you get sunlight that makes those crops mature, and then you can stock up for the winter. So then you
get tomato sandwiches.
You get lots of tomato sandwiches and sweet corn, which is a New World product, by the way. So are tomatoes. They come from South America. So in Europe, they wouldn't have thought about tomatoes and corn, at least in ancient times.
Silly.
So then you move toward summer. You got summer solstice, and then we just had our summer solstice, June 21st, and I told my husband the next day, I'm really depressed because now we're heading toward winter. Because every day after June 20th or 21st, then the daylight gets a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter. That means we're now on the downhill slide to winter, even though it's the middle of the summer. But it's really not the middle of the summer because summer didn't start till June 21st. But anyway, you roll toward the fall equinox, which is, again, that period where it's half light and half dark. And then you're really on a roll till December 21st, when you have the scariest time of the whole year because, it's the most hours of night. And ancient peoples didn't necessarily know that you're going to start getting back to daylight and long summers again. So you needed to pacify the spirits in the world and make sure that they were going to come back again. And so there were a lot of celebrations, June 21st, December 21st, and December 21st, it was all about, hey, we need to celebrate things that are staying green during this dark time, like fir trees and pine trees and ivy and mistletoe and all the yew trees, things that are evergreen that never die. And so somehow they have special.
Or cedar trees like that?
Cedar trees are like that. Yeah. So anything that's evergreen, mountain laurel, rhododendron, things like that are evergreen must have some special powers because they're not dying when the earth is dying. And so they're kind of lifted up, and you have this celebration of these trees and up in the northern part of Europe, the German area, they actually kind of did, I guess we'd call it tree worship today. It's much more complicated than that. And they had a celebration called Yule, Y-U-L-E, which now we think of as a Christmas celebration, the Yuletide.
Right.
But anyway, it was to celebrate these things that somehow were more powerful than the dying of the earth each year. And so they also was associated with that was feasting and celebration, because we passed the darkest time, and on the next day we're going toward summer again. So they do a lot of celebration, make a lot of noise to wake up the sleeping earth. So firecrackers, have a big bonfire and throw rocks in the fire, and the rocks have water in them, they pop and explode. And so a lot of noise making, a lot of partying. Hey, we've passed the worst of it. Now we're going back on the good side. So Europe had these celebrations in place in one way or another throughout Europe. So Christianity moves in the early years after Christ is born, 100, 200 AD, which AD stands for, it's Latin for the year of our Lord. And so, it's like, are they going to give up their religious practices and embrace this new religion? How are they going to do that? Well, this is Christianity kind of had the biggest PR job in the world. What they did is they said, well, and they didn't do this like probably a game plan, a political strategy. It just sort of happened, and it worked. When the Romans kind of moved into Europe, and they said, we're going to become Christian, and everyone becomes Christian, instead of like killing everybody off for having a solstice celebration, they just kind of combined everything and said, you already got a celebration here. Why don't we call it when Jesus was born? And call it Christmas or Christ Mass, which is in the Christian faith, you have communion, which celebrates Jesus and, the Last Supper and the symbolic body and blood of Christ. So you have this, so that communion is called Mass. And if it's the Mass of Christ, then it's Christ Mass or Christmas. So they just embraced what was already there.
Left out an S.
Yeah, it left out an S and sort of changed the pronunciation a little bit. So, and we did that with a lot of holidays. Like there's an All Saints Day, which is November 1st. And that's a day where you celebrate all your deceased family members, especially the ones who have gone up to heaven and are now saints, right, in heaven. So the night before All Saints Day, like Christmas Eve is the evening before Christmas. The night before All Saints Day is All Hallows Eve.
Okay.
Halloween. And it's the night that the spirits walk the earth before they go to heaven. So that's how Halloween kind of developed with that. So
we've obviously got many calls coming in today. But
we've got many calls coming in, people on the line.
We'll get back with you.
Yeah. So that's how, so they just co-opted and combined. And so if you say that Jesus was born on December 25th, then you got to work back 9 months so you got the winter, basically December 25th is right around the winter solstice. Okay. So you got to work back 9 months, and that gets you to the spring equinox.
Okay.
And that gets you to Easter. And also the spring equinox also became known as Annunciation Day, which is the day that Mary learned from God. He came down and said, hey, by the way, Mary, you're pregnant. And so then you got to work the 9 months in there, because even though God was technically the father of Jesus, but she still had to have a 9 months pregnancy. So, right. So you work in all those other things. So that's kind of how it winds up there. For hundreds of years, a lot of the churches, once you got to the Protestant churches, like our Presbyterians and even our brethren and our Mennonite, all the Calvinistic people of the Presbyterian church, and the Puritans and the Congregationalists, they didn't buy it. There's nothing in the Bible that says December 25th is the day that you do anything. So they didn't do anything. I mean, and they thought it was the Puritans actually outlawed Christmas. They didn't.
So they didn't celebrate it.
They didn't celebrate it, and this whole thing about Santa Claus and stockings and Christmas trees and stuff like that. It was like, that is just pagan stuff.
Pagan.
And even as late as the mid 1800s here in the Valley, the only ones that did anything church-wise were the Lutheran, the more traditional Protestant churches, so Lutheran and the Episcopalians, and of course the Catholics did it. But all the rest of them said, hey, that's either pagan or it's Catholic, which is almost as bad in their eyes. So the churches had a celebration, but even in the churches, you didn't bring in greenery and stuff like that, because that's pagan. So it was a quiet day. Didn't do much in the 19th century in the Valley around the church. And Francis McFarland, the guy that I studied and did my master's work on, he was a Presbyterian minister at Bethel Presbyterian Church, and he wrote in his diary that he didn't take much liking to Christmas. It was really something. He thought that it was the younger people were kind of embracing it, but he didn't see too much to it.
This would have been when?
1850s, 60s.
Okay.
You didn't really probably start seeing Christmas trees and greenery and stuff in churches until the early 1900s. But the Valley did some other interesting things, because, as I said, everything was all mixed up. It was in Europe and in the British Isles, and then those people came here, and they just kind of mixed up all these different traditions and kind of they all morphed into what we know today, but really didn't start coming together until about 150 years ago. But so there's Germans that came into the area, into the Shenandoah Valley. Mostly there was some Lutheran, but mostly like German Reformed, which would have been that kind of German Presbyterian Calvinist.
Yeah. UCC, United Church of Christ.
Yes, and then the Brethren and the Mennonites and those groups, they had really strong Germanic ties. And remember that tree cult that I was telling you about that happened? So, and that love of the evergreen, they brought that here. And, you couldn't find the same evergreens there as here, but you could find evergreens here. And so they started, it was really the Germans that started bringing this idea of a Christmas tree, of a tree around Christmas time, and kind of blending that into us. There's lots of stories about when the first Christmas trees came into Virginia, but it's always been with a Germanic person. There was a guy named Lewis Miller, and he's kind of a folk artist. He was a cabinet maker. I might have mentioned him in some of our other videos, but he was just a cabinet maker who lived up in York, Pennsylvania, and he kind of fancied himself a little bit of a folk artist. And I would say in the Grandma Moses tradition, although he wasn't really as talented as Grandma Moses, but he left these notebooks where he would make little drawings and make little comments about what he saw, and they're great. They're a great window into just everyday community life in Pennsylvania and also in the Shenandoah Valley, because he had some cousins that lived down in Christiansburg. So he was often making the trek from York, Pennsylvania, through the valley down to Christiansburg. And so he noted several important things involving slavery, but that'll be another talk right outside of Stanton. But in his little notebooks, they cut mountain laurel and they stuck it up and some greenery in their house, and they put some basic decorations on it, and that was their sort of Christmas tree. In Stanton, it's funny, when I worked at the Frontier Museum back in the 80s and early 90s, we started doing lantern tours, which probably a lot of you have heard of, and trying to figure out all these different Christmas traditions that were coming together. So I started looking into sources about what was Christmas like in Stanton and Augusta County, and maybe Rockingham County and Rockbridge County. And my grandmother was still alive, who grew up in Stanton, and she said, Polly Proofer wrote about that. And I'm like, Polly who? And she said, well, Polly Proofer. Her father was, I think he was the city manager of Stanton early on, early in the 20th century, so early 1900s. And she said, Polly Proofer went to Mary Baldwin, and she wrote about it in the Mary Baldwin Journal. So I went scrambling and looked it up, and sure enough, Polly Proofer in 1915 or 16 wrote a little book about how her family, her grandparents, had brought the first Christmas tree to Stanton, and they were from Germany, sort of late immigrants. They came in the late 1800s to this area, and by that time, the Christmas tree idea was full blown in Germany. So they brought this they set up this Christmas tree in this little kind of village around it. And Christmas tree is maybe about 5 foot tall, and put decorations on it. And people would come from all over to see the Proofer's Christmas tree. And that is the first documented Christmas tree in Stanton.
Man, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
So in the 20th century, the Presbyterians never could get over they never could really embrace having a Christmas tree in the church, but they started something which you know about, I think, the Chrismon tree.
I know all about the Chrismon tree.
And they started doing that, and that kind of was their that was their compromise of how to have a pagan tree into in the church. So
let me do my thing.
Tell us about the Chrismon tree.
I grew up in the Ascension Lutheran Church, which used to be called the Lutheran Church of the Ascension, but Bob Holly changed it in 1972 because he was from California. Anyway, he would like this. Anyway, so Francis Kip Spencer in 1957, just about a year before this, was a designer and very artistic lady, and so she invented the Chrismon tree, and it means Christ monogram. And she got little beads and stuff. But interestingly enough, the tree, that's the reason I asked this question, had to be cedar. And I'm sure it goes back, because if you look at the Advent wreaths of the Lutherans and the Moravians, they were all made out of those greenery. They went out and cut the greens sometimes with the little red berries on them. And so they were made out of those. And that started the fourth Sunday before Christmas. So when they followed that church year thing. But my dad and I used to go. Our job is just like a 30-foot tree, and I've got pictures of it. I'll put up. But our job was to go out and find the Chrismon tree every year. We had to go find a 30-foot tree that would fit through this door. And this is I was a teenager in the 70s, and and you can still go visit the Chrismon tree around Ascension Lutheran Church, like Lutheran Church of the Ascension in Danville, around Christmas time. So there you go. There's my tie with the greenery.
The Christmas story. And, even those wreaths were grabbing on of that pagan tradition of greenery, and the wreath being circular, life is going to continue. So that's again, co-opting those more ancient, more earth-like religions and celebrations. So it's all the only Christmas symbol that's really, truly Christmas would be the nativity scene. Everything else, the Christmas trees, the Advent wreath, the mistletoe, the Christmas stockings, they're all a co-opting. As I said, Christianity did a great PR job of saying, hey, we're not gonna to make you stop your beliefs, just kind of bring them in and let's make them a little bit our beliefs too, and just let's make it all together. So who's the biggest sort of non-Christ-like figure associated with Christmas these days?
Santa Claus.
And Santa Claus has a fascinating history that's part Christian and a lot not Christian. So there really was, we also call him Saint Nicholas or Kris Kringle, and Santa Claus really was a saint. He was a bishop in Turkey. And so Santa Claus would have been a pretty dark-skinned individual from the Middle East. And Santa Claus was a bishop in the 300s. So just a couple centuries after Christ. And then after he died, like a lot of bishops who did special things, maybe created some miracles in people's eyes, he became a saint. And so, and he was known, his robes were red, and probably had fur on them because it was cold and in the winter. And he had a long white beard, and he was known, his sort of mission in life was to take care of the poor and the needy, especially the children. So he would often go around at night and throw coins into people's windows. They'd land in kids' shoes, or down their chimney, and the coins would come to just help them out. And then, like I said, after he died, he became Saint Nicholas. In his day to celebrate in the church, his birthday, Nicholas's birthday, was December 6th. So December 6th is Saint Nicholas Day, and then so that sort of morphed over the hundreds of years into Saint Nicholas would come in the night and visit children, and so they would come on Saint Nicholas Eve, which was January 4th, and then that just kind of morphed into, hey, we got this thing at Christmas, that's the solstice, and we got this St. Nicholas thing, and let's just kind of gradually, the two came together. And so St. Nicholas Day kind of moved to Christmas, and this whole idea of gift giving, especially to children, not shoes anymore, but socks, which turned into stockings, just sort of all morphed together. And really, in Germany, this guy was this guy that travels at night kind of morphs into, in many Northern European areas, there's a Norse person who's sort of superhuman that travels at night, and he goes on a horse or sometimes a goat, flies through the air. And is all this sort of seeming sort of familiar, like reindeer and flying through the air. And so all these kind of traditions all get, become lost in the
flying goat deer.
Flying goat deer. Yeah, it's all sort of lost in the mist of history. And they're just a conglomeration of all these ancient traditions morphing with the church and coming together. And then, so in Germany, in the German speaking areas, this guy, he's not Saint Nicholas. So Kris Kringle is a corruption of the word Saint Nicholas. So is Santa Claus.
What about Father Christmas?
Father Christmas actually has a little bit different meaning. He kind of comes out of England during Henry VIII, when Henry VIII was kind of having a beef with the Catholic Church and kind of starting his own traditions, with the Episcopal Church and breaking away. And
I had to ask for Earl Downs. So
and Earl Downs is Father Christmas, but Father Christmas also gets mixed up in all of this. Okay. And so you finally get this modern figure of Santa Claus, which Santa is a corruption of saint, and Claus is Nicholas. So his roots are in Saint Nicholas and Kris Kringle and Father Christmas. And in Germany, he was called the Belsnickel, which Bells is fur clad and Schnickel is Saint Nicholas. So Belsnickel. And don't let me forget to talk about Belsnickeling, because that's a big deal here in the Valley. So anyway, and then in like the 1830s, there was a guy named Clement Moore who wrote this poem, and it's called A Visit by St. Nicholas. We know it today as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And he writes this poem where for the first time he pulls in all these different traditions and puts it down on paper and gets it published, and then it becomes sort of part of our psyche. Of this guy who comes, in a sleigh, flying through the air, drawn by these animals, and he goes down a chimney to bring gifts, kind of like St. Nicholas did when he threw coins down a chimney, and blah, blah, blah. And he becomes, there you go, St. Nicholas. So Merry Christmas. So he's the one that talks about, what he looked like, when he laughed, he had a bowl full of jelly is what his laugh was like. His stomach was like a bowl full of jelly when he laughed. And then you had, so he started bringing it all together. And then you had a cartoonist named Thomas Nast, who really was a political cartoonist. And he wrote and drew for a magazine called Harper's Weekly, which everybody in the United States in the 1850s and 60s and 70s read Harper's Weekly. It was the go-to place for your information. And Thomas Nast is the first really modern political cartoonist. He kind of, he invented some things, political cartooning, but he's the one that kind of started drawing what St. Nicholas would have looked like. He also kind of made us. He didn't invent Uncle Sam, but he's the one that started drawing what Uncle Sam would have looked like. And also some other symbols like the GOP elephant and things like that, that, you know, Republicans. So he's the one that put on paper with a drawing what our psyche was thinking. And so really between Moore and Nast, we owe a lot of our modern Christmas traditions and thinking. Now, here in the Valley, though, there were some other kind of breakout things that happened that are related deeply to our roots. And this Belsnickeling is one of them. So the Belsnickel comes from German tradition or German speaking areas. And it means fur-clad Santa Claus. And it really kind of morphed into I describe it as Halloween at Christmas time. And so in those kind of the 12 days of Christmas idea, the idea was you dress up like maybe like sort of Santa Claus, but maybe you just disguise, you put masks on, you stuff clothes in you so that you don't look the same size, you stuff pillows in there, put other people's clothes on, sometimes men dressed as women, women dressed as men, and then you would go house to house and you would knock on people's door in the middle of the night and demand that they try to guess who you were, and then they need to feed you, give you some cider or something warm because it's going to be cold and they're tramping for miles from house to house, and give you some gingerbread or some kind of, you know, Christmas baked goods. And the people who got visited upon, they would try to crank up the stove knowing that these people were dressed in layers and layers of clothes and were going to just get too hot and have to leave, just to get them out of the house, stop having to feed them and talk to them because it was the middle of the night, and then they'd go on to somewhere else. And so they went, it was called going Belsnickeling. And we've got pictures.
Did they sing carols by any chance?
They sometimes would have sung carols, I think, you know, because it was
all. Closest thing to it is Christmas caroling.
Well, Christmas caroling, and in England, you had this thing called mumming, which is you kind of dress up in costume and kind of go do plays at people's houses. So all these Christmas traditions just got kind of all run together here in the area, so that we kind of created our own Christmas traditions. But Pennsylvania and the Shenandoah Valley are really known for this Belsnickeling, spelled many different ways. And in fact, so much so, and it was totally done outside the church. The church wouldn't have condoned it because there was probably often drinking involved in it. But the general stores started selling Belsnickeling masks, and that's what I've got one here that I got. This was sold in a local store, I would guess in the 1920s or 30s, but it's a Belsnickeling mask. And you see it's supposed to sort of look like Santa Claus, but doesn't have the white beard that we think of as Santa Claus today. But this is a Belsnickeling mask.
Pig human.
It's kind of fragile now, but you pulled it over your head, and it's kind of that early plastic cellulite stuff. And my friend Mary Kay Van Hooser, who's a wonderful framing artist, figured out a way to frame it and protect it for me. But so you had the Belsnickeling. That tends to have German roots because that Belsnickel comes from that fur-clad Santa Claus. Saint Nicholas is what it means. It tended to be more in the German communities, in the Scotch-Irish communities, the Presbyterian communities, and the English communities. They kind of drew from more of this mumming tradition from England and the British Isles. But it all gets mixed up and morphs here in the Valley. So in the Belsnickelers visited house to house. Then there was another group of people who still disguised themselves and dressed up, and we'll show pictures of these. I've got a picture of Belsnickelers up in Rockingham County, maybe Augusta, and I've got the other group, which is called the Shanghaiers. They were Shanghaiers. Mostly they just dressed up, got on horses, and ran through the towns and disturbed people, and kind of even did a parade. Like you have mummers parades in the big cities today around Christmas time. So they just were, it was an excuse to get out and be rowdy when the winters were cold and the nights were long. And it was a way to make a lot of noise. Remember I said you make noise. So they didn't say, by the 1800s, they weren't making noise to wake up the sleeping spirits of the earth, but they were making noise because it had always been the tradition to make noise and be loud and rowdy on these dark nights.
Yeah.
So these Shanghaiers, there's a diary in Greenville from the 1890s or so in the same time. There was Shanghaier parade today in Greenville. And then I've got this great picture that Gary Rosen, the Middlebrook historian, found on the internet, and it's Shanghaiers in Middlebrook on I think it's New Year's Eve in 1899. It's a great picture. We'll show that. And so it was just an excuse for young people to get rowdy, just like today. And so the other things that they would do at Christmas is they would always, the stores, the general stores always sold firecrackers. And between Christmas and New Year's, especially New Year's Eve, everybody was shooting off firecrackers. And also Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, people were shooting off firecrackers, or they build a big bonfire and throw rocks in it and have them explode and pop. And you could buy a firecracker. Well, I call it a firecracker. It was basically a stick of dynamite in Stanton, in Stanton on Christmas Day. Because you know what? Everybody talks about Christmas is too commercialized today.
Right.
Hey, get over that. It was really commercialized in the 19th century. Christmas Day, all the stores were open. And nobody went to church Christmas Day except for the Catholics and the Anglicans, or the Episcopalians and the Lutherans. Everybody else was out partying. And in fact, the newspaper in Stanton, the Stanton Spectator, talked about in the 1830s of, okay, we're going to have another Christmas Day, and people are going to be sick and throwing up in the streets afterwards and drinking too much, and there's going to be loud noises and firecrackers, and we're just, kind of tired of it. And but there were ads filled with buy our firecrackers, buy our wassail punch, buy all these toys for the kids. So the merchants jumped on this as a commercial venture, in the early 1800s at least, maybe even before that. And so, but this firecracker for 50 cents, which was a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
Back then, for 50 cents in the, I think, 1890s, you could buy this firecracker that was, get this, it was 4 inches wide and 12 inches long.
That's the bomb. Yeah.
That's a bomb, or a couple sticks of dynamite put together. But anyway, they sold that in the store, and the kids bought it and probably blew their fingers off. But it was a big day, and the Shanghaiers, and this was all happening during the Christmas season. So basically the 12 days of Christmas, and that the 12 days of Christmas have ancient origins, but really go back to. So, you've got solstice, and then you've got, and then when that sort of became Christmas, and you got to put 12 days out when the three wise men, there's nothing in the Bible that says they were three wise men. It just, they were wise men who were kings, probably astrologers from the Middle East, who saw this bright light, whether it was a comet or
or the Star of Bethlehem.
Well, it was a star. It became called the Star of Bethlehem, but it was some kind of event bright light up in the sky that probably was not. People have astronomers; they can calculate back, and see what was happening, like were all these planets in alignment with each other and creating a bigger light. It probably was an alignment of planets of some sort, but it could have been a comet. Or could have been a supernova exploding that was seen, or something like that. But there was some event that these astrologers, these elite people, educated people in Middle Eastern society saw, and were going to go find it. And so they traveled to find it, and then brought gifts, because they knew sort of this prediction of the king of the Jews being born. So they arrived. Technically on, if we're saying Christmas is 25th, they arrived on January 6th. It's called Epiphany. It's kind of celebrated as the day the wise men arrive and bring their gifts. I don't know why Mary and Joseph were still hanging around there then 12 days later. Maybe they had to because of the census taking that was happening. But then there's also, so you've got reason to party in all those days. And then there's also, an event back in the 1500s. For hundreds and hundreds of years, we had kept a calendar that was a Roman calendar called the Julian Calendar, and for Julius Caesar. And they didn't quite calculate it right. You know how we've got a leap year that's in there now, that every year we add a year plus plus it's really 365 and a quarter days. So that's why we have to every 4 years put the leap year in to make up for that a quarter day. Well, no, the Romans hadn't done that, and they had actually a calendar that was pretty whacked up. And so in the 1500s, the Julian calendar had to get revised, and Pope Gregory helped with his mathematicians and scientists. They created a new calendar that put the leap year in and fixed it, and they had to knock out 10 days. And so you went from, like, say, December 1st to December 11th overnight. And then, but the Protestant part of Europe and the British Isles they said, we don't want anything to do with a calendar that the Pope has anything to do with. We're not Catholic. So they kept using the old calendar, and it got more whacked up until the 1700s, when they had to also jump over to the Gregorian calendar. And by that time, it had gotten so whacked up, they had to knock out 12 days. So during George Washington's time and Jefferson's time in the 1700s, they went to sleep one night and woke up 12 days later. And that gave them an excuse to say there was old Christmas and new Christmas, and let's party for the 12 days that we lost. And so that's kind of how you get the 12 days of Christmas and the part of it. There's other things that factor into it, but
Somebody made a lot of money on a song.
that's right. And then they had to think up all the things that you were going to get each day.
Right.
The drummers drumming and the partridges and things like that. The gold rings. Yes, Christmas. So that's kind of cool. And I've talked to a lot of people, who were born in the early teens and the 20s and 30s, asking what Christmas was like here in the Valley in that time period. And it was a lot simpler. They did often have Christmas trees. They just go out and cut something down in the woods. So that's very often a cedar tree, because that's the tree that grows a lot here. In fact, I remember Randy and I we had an apartment on Orange Street in Stanton when we first got married, and there's just 2 rooms, and we didn't have any money, so we went out on the side of the road and found a Christmas tree that was covered in ice and snow, a little cedar tree that was growing, and we cut it down and brought it into our apartment, and then we had to melt all the icicles with our hairdryer. But it wasn't,
That's special.
Some people put their socks up, their own stockings, rather than a special stocking. They just put their own. But a lot of people in this area, they remember not putting out stockings or shoes or boots or anything, but having a box, a Christmas box. So they would just put like a box out, like a shoe box, and that would get filled with usually oranges and a few, maybe a candy, a couple hard pieces of candy or something like that, but nothing big. If they got something big, it might have been one thing, like a doll baby or a sled or something like that, or for a little boy, a gun to go hunting. So that would have been big. Did
you ever see the first Walton episodes? The very first,
yeah.
Homecoming, and the dad got locked up and he got caught in Waynesboro in a snowstorm, and John Boy went out and he went to this African American church, and they had this box of fruit. They all got boxes. When I grew up in Danville, I went out to the late Reverend Thomas Hardy's Pentecostal church with my buddy Ronnie, and they didn't celebrate Christmas because they were Pentecostal holiness, but they had Mr. Christmas Tree. They had a 2-way radio, and the kids came up and told the green tree what they wanted. And at the end of the service, and after I saw that Walton's episode, they got their little box. It was sitting in the back of the church floor. So it's cool. So
yeah, so this box thing was pretty big in the Valley or in Western Virginia, I think. And I don't really know the origins of that. And maybe it's because people were so poor they didn't have anything else. Yeah. You didn't have extra stockings to hang up. You might only have one pair of stockings. But they had
apple crates.
There you go, an apple crate, that would get you a lot of gifts. But the other thing that Christmas always has been associated with here is, like you saw in the Waltons, homecoming. It was the time where people could go and for that 2-week period of time, spend time at home. The schools would have gotten out, so kids that were away at school would come back. Before the Civil War, when you had a lot of slaves who were lent to like big industries, like there was a big ironworks down in Rockbridge that they rented the labor of hundreds of slaves from all over this area. And one lady in Stewart's Draft remembers that groups of those slaves were coming home to spend, they'd get like the 12 days off at Christmas. They would come home to spend the time with their families wherever they lived and were, where their residence was, who technically owned them, which is a sad footnote in our Valley history that needs to be told more about. But it was even for the most downtrodden, it was a time to at least be with your family and have a little bit of relief from everyday life. And so it was a time where everybody was going home, like the Waltons were saying, it was a homecoming. And there was extra, even if you didn't have a lot, there was always extra food and extra, all the memories of people growing up here, and ours probably are too, of the extra food, the special things, the cookies or the breads or the finally having some good meat on the table, are all associated with Christmas. So we all have warm and fuzzy feelings about this, but it's kind of interesting to peel back the layers and see how that is. Christmas cards themselves aren't very old. It really is something that started happening in the late 1800s.
Right. Anyway, well, that's something probably a lot of people didn't know about, the whole thing. So anyway, what do you do when Christmas comes around?
Well, most of our family, older family, are gone now, so it's been kind of quiet, and sometimes we just go to a Chinese restaurant because they're often open because they celebrate different holidays, and so but we do a few small gifts, and of course we don't have any kids, so we always give the dogs and the cats something, and
right.
So that gift giving is there, but might go and do some visiting. That's always something special, is to go visiting. So Christmas is whether I spent some time in Japan back about 20 years ago, and even the Christmas is now, it's more than just a religious celebration. It is a worldwide celebration of, hey, let's take a pause and let's celebrate family and some special things. And so even in Japan, even though there are a lot of Christians there, but there are a lot of other religions that aren't Christ-centric, Shinto and Buddhism, but they still celebrate it as a secular holiday. Send Christmas cards and they have Christmas cards, and I got a Christmas card from one of my families one year that had a sumo wrestler on it. So
anyway, all right, I'm going to give you the Adams Christmas Eve story, but I got to get something here.
Okay.
So my brother and I, since we went to the Chrismon Church, so how many people own one of these, man? Come on, seriously.
I was an acolyte in church, and I don't own one of those, but I had to use those to put out the candles on the altar.
Yeah, so I can't get the wax is stuck up on this one. But anyway, so we would it was a huge Christmas. You can imagine this 30-foot Chrismon tree, cedar tree, with the Christian Year series on it and all that stuff. So they had all this stuff going on there. So our job was to light the candles, and there must have been 100 candles in the church at least. And we had to start it started at 11:30. The Catholics were across the street, so they were doing their thing. So we would have to look at each other, and the fear was, and this is so cool because it has wax stuff in it. You can see it right here if you look at the wax. Mm-hmm. But this one's stuck right now. I actually bought this one for the Christmas at Augusta Stone because they never had two of these, so we needed two so we could light and put out again. So you had to light the candle like that. So we would do that, and then we'd go home at 11 o'clock, and Lee Kynard would be on WFMY Channel 2, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point, as opposed to WXJS, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point. And they would have this blinking nose on the thing, and it says, "All children should be in the bed." It was early radar. So we'd go to bed. Anyway, so that's why I have that. I've got one of these in my house. Anyway.
So did you ever have any, accidents where you almost burned down the church or anything like that?
No, but the problem was you were afraid the wick was going to run out. So you had to kind of keep enough speed that the wick would not run out, because you'd always get that candle that wouldn't light.
Right.
So, Yeah, so your little acolyte boys up there, me and my
Well,
brother.
I've got a Christmas fire story for you too. You'd always have a Christmas pageant in the church, and my younger brother Andrew was an angel, and all the little angels had to parade into the sanctuary of the church, and they were all holding candles. I don't know why you would give 5-year-olds candles, but they were all holding candles like this, and I don't know I can't remember if it was his candle or the candle of the kid, behind it. Somehow his eyelashes and all caught on fire. So not a good thing. But I also remember, the warning about, in this Belsnickel in Germany was always accompanied by this guy called Krampus, who was he was the bad guy. It was like good cop, bad cop. They would go when they leave presents. Krampus would also come, and if the kids were bad, he would leave coal and switches and things like that. So that's kind of how you get the naughty or nice kind of thing. Of course, all kids were told, as you get closer to Christmas, it's like, you better be good because Santa Claus is keeping a list. Well, I remember I must have been about 4 or 5 years old, and we were living up in Hyattsville, Maryland, and I was just apparently very wound up and excited about Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, and my parents were not excited about me being up. And so all of a sudden there was a knock at the door, and one of my parents went and, answered the door, and they're like, "Oh, Santa Claus." And you hear this, "Ho, ho, 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 ho." And they're like, "Santa Claus, she's not asleep yet. Can you come back a little bit later?" And, and I remember being, just so scared. And I went up to bed and went to sleep. And it was probably 30 years later, I found out it was my older brother apparently my parents had said, "Please go out, knock on the door, and pretend to be Santa Claus and get that child to bed."
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we had the one I never got 30 years later was the reindeer water. We always left the bucket of water out for the reindeer on the back porch. And the true belief in Santa Claus was every year that bucket was empty. Yeah. I mean, it took me forever to figure that one out.
That was, that's taking the cookies and milk one step further. Well,
yeah.
We did leave a carrot for the reindeer too. I don't even know if reindeer like carrots.
But it disappeared. It wasn't there the next day, was it?
It wasn't there the next day. It was sometimes, there'd be like a cookie with just a bite out of it, and Santa Claus was in a hurry.
Right. So anyway.
So anyway, Christmas is fun. Everybody should make their own memories and write them down, and we'd love to hear them.
And I hope even during the pandemic here that they have, if you ever get a chance to go to the lantern tours at the Frontier Culture Museum, they're really good. I actually play for those every year.
That's right, and I can say that I'm the one who helped start those years and years ago.
They're very successful. I don't know if they'll do it this year. We'll have to wait and see how it works out. But anyway, you start looking on the Frontier Culture Museum website in November. I think you can reserve.
And hopefully Earl Downs has Father Christmas. When he's able to, he's just an amazing Father Christmas. But I've got a funny story about one of the first or second lantern tours at the Frontier Culture Museum. If you've got time, it's so back then, we had a few buildings. We didn't have the big fence that separated us from what's now Frontier Drive. But we had a litter of pigs, and they were little pigs. We were quite attached to them, and the little pigs would get out of the pig pen and run kind of wild. And so this was right when we were planning the lantern tours, planning what food we were going to have on the table, and one of those little baby pigs sadly ran out in front of a car and got hit by a car, but it didn't really, it killed it, but there wasn't any like visible damage on the pig. So we decided, okay, our Christmas meal this year is going to be suckling pig. And I took that pig home, and I looked up, I never baked a suckling pig before, put an apple in its mouth and put a string of cranberries around its little neck. And that suckling pig got baked at home and then was on the table all through the lantern tours, unfortunately for the little pig, but it made a good centerpiece of the food. that we wouldn't have had otherwise. But suckling pig would have been a big delicacy at that time.
Delicacy. All right, Nancy. Well, we'll see what happens next week. And like I said, this is episode 9 of Footnotes and Value History. If you're interested in sponsoring us, we're not a 501(c)(3) anything, but it's $25 a show. We just got time in this right now. We're doing it during the pandemic season.
Yep, and we're hoping maybe if we get enough interest in sponsors, we might continue doing it and do a second season series.
Second season. We're going to do 12 right now. We've got, so this is 9, 10, 11, 12. So we've got 3 more to go after this one. It'll be done about August, something like that. First of August. All right. Well, Nancy, it was good to talk to you, and you're watching Footnotes and Valley History with me.
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho. Hey, 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 hey. Remember,
all right. Wait, let's put the Belsnickel up here.
Belsnickel. All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Okay.